Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's 10 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Sorry to break in on your conversations here. My name is John Humphrey. On behalf of the Sunday Forum Committee, I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you so much for being here. If you're here with us online, please feel equally welcome, even though you're not here in the room with us. For those of you in the room, you might notice a very strange room layout, not at all what we're used to. There's a poetry reading here tomorrow night, and the room has been set up in advance for that. And so we just want to, they asked if we could have the room like this for them so they didn't have to rearrange it all the time. And we said, this one time we can put up with it, right? So that is what we are doing. I don't think you'll need it, but just in case, there are hearing help devices on the back table. So just if you are a person who has difficulty with that, please feel free to use one of these. I've actually used them at my advanced age. I have found that I actually benefit from them, and so I can vouch for them. They work well. Anybody, I think I see mostly familiar faces here, but just in case anybody unfamiliar with the church, there are restrooms pretty much right outside the door and just about 20 feet down the hall on the right side. So if you need a restroom, that's where they are. With that, it is my pleasure, my privilege to welcome our speaker, Wakpada, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Hall to introduce him for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John, and good morning, everybody. Let us start by acknowledging we are on the territory of the Dakota people, who have through generations and even today continue to steward the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Minnesota. Before it was Minnesota, this land was Minnesota Mokache, the land where the waters reflect the clouds. And this is a really great time to have Shishoka, and his wife Katie is here as well. She's a wonderful artist. This is the Easter season, right? And the ministers have been talking about it's Friday and there's injustice in the world, but Sunday's coming. And Sunday's about restoration and healing. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. It's a great honor to have with us today Wakpada, who's a Dakota language professor at the University of Minnesota, and he chairs a nonprofit that is dedicated to preserving the Dakota language, as very few elders remain who speak Dakota as their native tongue. I first met Dakota in August of 2021. Over the last year and a half, Shishoka and I have worked together on an apartment project, which we'll discuss more at a forum in October 1st. But today, Shishoka's here to tell us about a nonprofit he chairs that is dedicated to land recovery. I've learned a great deal from Shishoka, including some important American Indian values related to connection and sustainability. Water is life. You'll hear that often, and that's because we need to cherish and protect our waters, because they are the key to life. We are all related. All of us, people, animals, nature, and the stars, we are all related, and that brings connection and makes us respect and care for everyone and everything around us. We think of what happened with the American Indians in the past, but they are still with us today, working diligently to preserve their culture and language and to pass their culture and language along to their youth. So Shishoka, we look forward to learning from you today about how you're doing that. Thank you.
Dakota chaje makupi kin Shishoka makiapido petikinde Dakota wichuha unyapi Dakota kin iwa herakikde toka here umichi herakikde Shishoka Dakota chaje kin makupi nakon washichu chaje mitawa kin Joe Dixon makiapido ga Dakota sisitoa otonge ed matumpi ga nakon bere herakian oyate ed omawapi ga wana de Indonesia ska otonge ed watido Dakota yapi wa unspe wichakia hemacha Minnesota wanspe wa kantia edwa khtoani ga Dakota yapi kinde yuha imacha khishni tka wana de omaka wikchamaranum ched Dakota yapi kinde unspe michichie petu kinde Dakota iwa hada kikde washichia hana iwa hada kikde wana Dako epe bidu yeska. So translate what I say for you. Sometimes when I introduce myself in Dakota, then it's hard to remember everything I said. But anyways, hello to all of you. Greeting in traditional Dakota way. As Jeff said, we say that we're all related as people on this earth. We're all people, so it's a traditional Dakota greeting. I shake all of your hands with a good heart, and I'm glad to be here. My Dakota name is Shishoka Dutta, and Shishoka is robin, and Dutta is red, like the restaurant. But English, my name is Joe Bendixson, and most Dakota people, we have English names too. That kind of started in the 19th century, and we started getting English names. And so some people don't have English names now. They've just used their Dakota name too. But I use both to reflect, I have a mixed ancestry. But I come from this place called Sisset in South Dakota. That's where I was born. And I'm a tribal member at the Lake Traverse Reservation. And I live here in St. Paul and work at the University of Minnesota, as Jeff said, teaching Dakota language. And I have been learning the language for over 20 years now. And I didn't grow up as a fluent speaker, but you know, I've heard words and phrases my whole life growing up from older people. But you know, they always said, "Don't speak this language, speak English now," because of the way they were treated. But that's a whole different topic, I guess. So that's kind of just a few things about me. I'm also the chair of the board of this nonprofit organization called Makoche Ikikchupi. Makoche means the land, and Ikikchupi means taking back one's own. So it's taking back our land is what it translates to. And also I work at the University of Minnesota, Dakota Language Teaching Specialist, and I'm the chair of a board chair of another organization and the kind of staff linguist, Dakota Iapi Okoda Kichie, which means Dakota Language Society. It's a nonprofit organization. So before I launch into talking about Makoche Kikchupi and the land back, Jeff said he wanted me to highlight a few things I'm doing with these other groups. So at the University of Minnesota, one of the things that I'm most proud of that we've recently done is we started a Dakota language daycare for 3 to 5-year-olds. And it started in fall of 22, right after Labor Day. And we've been going since then. We have 2 teachers, and we have some student workers who are taking my classes at the university, and then they go do kind of student teaching. And you know, it's really amazing to see the children speaking the language. That's kind of what we need. If you scan that QR code, you can learn more about it. And there's a picture of the children with the teachers, and this child right here, that's our 4-year-old. And they said, "Why'd you want to start this language nest?" And well, because I want my son to be in it. But you know, it's it's for all the other children too. And it's at the Child Development Laboratory School. It's pretty close to East Bank. It's about 4 blocks north of the East Bank. And it's been really amazing. We call it Dakota Yapi Wahochbi, which means Dakota language, and Wahochbi means nest. And it was started by the Maori people, and maybe you've heard of them. I always forget how to say the name of their country in Maori, but in English, New Zealand. And they started this in the late 1970s. And the idea was to model it after a bird feeding its young. And so they took the elderly fluent speaker and put them in this daycare with the young children. And the idea is the language goes from their mouth to the mouths of the young children. And so it's kind of spread from there throughout the world. The Hawaiian people of Hawaii, they also did it, and they've brought their language back from extinction. And it's something that's being done here too by Ojibwe people, now Dakota, and kind of other indigenous peoples of North America. So that's what I'm most proud of, that we've started at the University of Minnesota. We also recently started Dakota Language BA in fall of 22. So now people can graduate with a BA in Dakota Language. And we also have a Dakota Language House, which I know Jeff and I were kind of collaborating on. And so there's a lot of great stuff happening at the University of Minnesota for Dakota Language. Another thing I told you about is this nonprofit organization called Dakota Yapi Okodakichie. So recently we just released a Dakota Language Dictionary app. And so you can download it for your phone. And there's the QR codes if you have Apple or Android. And it has over 28,000 entries in Dakota. And we tried to record every word, so it could be a spoken dictionary. And so there's over 40,000 audio. But when we finished doing all the recording, we added new words, so we're gonna have to go back and re-record some of the words. So, but you're always adding new stuff to these things. That's the great thing about making an app, is we can continuously update it as opposed to a print version where you have to come out with different volumes every so often. The goal is eventually we will do a print version, but that's kind of a 5 to 10 year goal down the road. But we're really proud of this. It took us 5 years to make this. These apps are not easy to make, especially when you have to go out and record people for this. And as Jeff mentioned, most of our speakers are past retirement age. And so to arrange times to record them, and then to respect their time, you know, you can't make them work 5 days a week, 40 hours a week. You know, and then once we recorded, we had to edit the recordings, and then there was errors in the recording, they had to re-record. So it took a while to do the recording, but once we did that, then we had to turn it into the app form, and then you have to test it. And you have to find all the errors in the testing phase. And so that took another year to get through the testing. And then we just released that in February. So you're all free to download it from the App Store or Google Play Store, and it's free. So anybody can use this. And a lot of people say, well, you know, the language, shouldn't it just be for our people? And I always say that anyone can learn the language, especially if they're here in Minnesota, Makoche. But, you know, the language, I always say the language belongs to the Dakota people. But that doesn't mean anyone can learn it. Was there a question? Oh, well, you'll be able to look them up. Oh, the question was, the person there works with plants and wanted to know the Dakota names of the plants. So, if they're not from this area originally, it there might not be a name for it in our language, yeah, so. So that's one thing we're really proud of. We do a lot of other stuff. So our website is dakota.org, DAKH. So if you look us up, you'll see all the other stuff we're doing. But, I don't want to take up too much time on that. I want to talk about the Makoche Kikchupi. So Makoche Kikchupi Land Recovery Organization. So the purpose is to reconnect Ocheti Shakawin people to our homeland. Ocheti Shakawin, you might not know what that is. So Dakota people, they had kind of a federation as a group of different bands of people. And the different bands of people kind of grouped them, they called like Tioshpaye. So Tioshpaye is a community. And then when you have a bunch of communities together, you could call that like an Oyate. That's a nation. And so we had these different Oyate, and there was 7 major groups of them. And so Shakawim is 7, and Ocheti is a fire or a fireplace. And so the fire was very important long ago, especially as people who mostly lived outdoors. You had to have fire. So the 7 fires, they kind of stood for 7 council fires. So that's how we grouped ourselves as a federation or a group of people as a nation. So it's to reconnect our Ocheti Shakawin people to our homeland through land recovery in Minnesota, Makoche, and that's what we call this place here, Minnesota, Makoche. And the establishment of culturally oriented and self-sufficient Dakota communities. Another purpose is to recover and share traditional knowledge that connects us to our homeland. So my part is the Dakota language. So that's my specialty in the organization. I'll talk about what other people do later. To develop sustainable and regenerative practices that will help restore integrity to the lands and waters while living the ethic of Midakwe Oase. So Jeff talked about Miniwichoni, water is life, and since water is life and it's essential for life, we consider like we have to protect the water, because without it we wouldn't be here. And we have this phrase we say, Midakwe Oase, that means we're all related. Midakwe means my relative, and then Oase means all. So it's like we're all related, everyone's my relative. And the last is to work towards land justice. So those are the main points of the organization. I gotta make sure I stay on time here. All right, so here's some older paintings that were done in the 19th century. As you can see, these are some different structures. The top 2 are older images, and then the bottom one on the bottom left there is what we have made ourselves. It's an earth lodge. So you might be familiar with the iconic structure, the teepee. So that's in the top left there. Teepee, that's kind of a Englishized way of saying it, because from what I was told, when early Euro people got here, they said, "What is that?" And they pointed at Dakota and said, "Oh, teepee." And what teepee really translates to means they live there. And but we called it Ti Ikcheka, is one way, which means a common dwelling. Or another way of saying it is Ti Pestoda, like a cone-shaped dwelling. Or yeah, those are the 2. Ti Pestoda, Ti Ikcheka. Or you could sometimes call it OT, just a dwelling place. And, you know, that's made out of animal hides traditionally, buffalo, maybe sometimes elk. You know, you want to use a larger animal. And later on, when there was less buffalo, we'd use canvas. So we can't use buffalo anymore because there's not enough buffalo. So you have to use canvas if you're going to have a teepee today. And then if you look at this one on the right side here, that's what we call Changacha teepee, or a bark lodge. Some people maybe call it Chan teepee, but it was made out of the bark of elm trees, which we all know there's no elm trees anymore, right, because of the emerald ash borer, right? Or no, there was a bug, right, that destroyed all the elm trees. And so we don't have those anymore around here, but there's another elm that grows in Ohio or Indiana, I believe. And so another group of people from Prairie Island, they built a bark lodge recently, but they had to travel all the way there to gather all the bark. But, you know, it's something that is possible to do. And I went inside the one they built recently. It's a very nice place, you know, but those were kind of like your summer dwellings, the ones on the right. And mostly in the winter you live in the teepee because it's warmer. But long ago, Dakota people used to live in these earth lodges. That's what we call it, Wakpada teepee. That's on the bottom there. Wakpada teepee, it's like an earth lodge. And Dakota people lived in these earth lodges historically, but that's when we lived kind of around Lake Mille Lacs in northern Minnesota before the Ojibwe came. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but there was a warfare between the Dakota and Ojibwe. It was a 50-year war. And then the Dakota people were kind of pushed out of northern Minnesota and, you know, reside in the southern half of Minnesota. But there's a smoke hole in the top. And so the Ojibwe, they would drop these makeshift bombs in the smoke holes. And so then as Dakota people, you know, were pushed south. But, you know, so Dakota people haven't lived in these earth lodges for quite a long time. But it's environmentally friendly. Doesn't require any electricity. Uses all sustainable materials. And I'll show you some of the images of us building them. But before I do that, I'll show you where the site is. So, has anybody been to Grand Falls, Minnesota? Okay, just one person, just a couple of people. Okay, well, if you go straight west on 212, Highway 212, you'll run into Grand Falls. And if you see this highway here, kind of going a diagonal northwest there, that is Highway 212. So we're pretty close to Highway 212. This is right side outside of Grand Falls. And there's kind of like a business right here in that bottom right corner. If you turn left there and then you come to that kind of fork in the road and you go right, you'll kind of go up this gravel road and you'll see the sign to our place. So it's right here. That's the entrance, that first yellow pin, and then that second yellow pin on the top there. That's where we have our village site. And when you get to the entrance, this is what it'll say. Dakota Land Recovery. You'll see that. And then you see that's our logo too. Oh, keeps going too fast. And then when we get here, there's another sign on the far left. Can't see it, but it says all Oceti Shakopee people are welcome here. We welcome all of our own people to this place. And why do we do that? Well, Dakota people were exiled from the state of Minnesota. How many people are aware of that? Okay, a good number of you. Some of you may not be aware of it, but in 1863, February, the United States government voided all the treaties we had signed with them, and we were exiled. And then on May 4th, 1863, they loaded us in steamboats from Fort Snelling and exiled us physically. So a lot of people fled before that. During the War of 1862, people fled, and then those who didn't fled were captured and imprisoned at Fort Snelling. And Dakota people were executed on December 26, 1862. So maybe some of you are aware of that. But since that time, Dakota people have kind of been living in exile, so to speak. You know, a lot of us have moved back. We have bought our own land or houses, or we live here, we rent or lease. But to have our own land base here, you know. There are 4 Dakota communities federally recognized by the government, and one kind of independent community called in Mendota. But a lot of other people who have live in other parts of the world, you know, mainly South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, parts of Canada, you know, they want to come back home, but there's nowhere to come back home to, you know. So that's kind of one of the missions of our organization, to reconnect our people to this land, and providing a space where we can have these communities is the goal of the organization. So we welcome all of our people to this area. Oh, okay. Is that? Yeah, that's the next one. So this is what it looks like inside when we're building it. So we use tamarack pine, and we have these 4 kind of beams in the middle that support kind of the structure here, and then the 4 cross poles there. But 4 is an important number in Dakota culture, because we have the 4 seasons, but we also have the 4 directions, and then we also have the 4 stages of life, you know, from birth, adolescence, adulthood, and elderly. And then, you know, so it's a very important number. A lot of things happen in 4 in Dakota. And then, from what I was told, is on the This is on the roof, looking over the Minnesota River Valley. So it's very beautiful. One of the things we did was we like to collaborate with other tribal nations. So we went to visit the Muskogee, and they have their own eco village in Alabama by Sylacauga, and that's me in the kind of the top corner of the hat on. And there's Katie there too. And a lot of people in our organization went to this, but they have their own eagle village. They have like all kinds of eagle housing set up, and they have like rain catchment so they can like preserve water. And they've used all like sustainable materials with their work. And they acquired the land too. And that was the amazing part. They had all their own land, and it was on this what do they call it, the longleaf pine. It was they had found part of land where it was like one of the only parts of land that had longleaf pine left, and they bought the land and they're preserving that now, and they're using natural wildfires to like restore the land, and they have their own buffalo herd, and they have their own fish hatchery, and they had like they had chickens and hogs too. So they had like all their own food source. They grew their own food. It was amazing to see. And remember when that hurricane kind of came through Florida and Trump threw that arrow to Alabama? Well, that's how I remember it. And but that hurricane hit their land, and a bunch of these trees fell over, and they were able to use those trees that fell over to make all these beautiful structures. And we were in some of them. One of the buildings had solar panels, and they used that for electricity. That's what it looks like they're standing in the light there. It was such a beautiful place. So it just showed us what's possible, for us to do in this area. So the question was, how did we get the land? I'll just maybe use this image to talk about that. How did we get? Well, we can accept donations from non-Dakota people, or mainly like Euro Americans people. Other people have given us money too, but that's how we take donations from people, and we use that to make the land purchases. And our thought behind that is that why should we have to buy our own land back with our own money? The land was taken away illegally. So, we said, well, then we will accept donations from people, make these land purchases. And this piece of property here, I believe we raised over $100,000 to acquire this piece of property. Yeah, I forgot how many acres it is. I think it's like 20 or maybe 30, between 20 and 30 acres. It's a nice piece of land. It's not huge, but it's not small either. And stopped here because when we started building, the city of Grand Falls came and said, "Oh, you guys can't build this." They said, this is against the building code violations. There's all kinds of building code violations here. And we said, well, we're going to build anyways. And well, they said, well, if you start building, we're going to have to file a lawsuit against you to stop you, take you to court. So then we tried to work out things with the Grand Falls City Council. They said, well, we don't really want this to go to court. What can we do? So we worked with them and said, well, we'll ask the state of Minnesota to change the building codes. So we went all the way to the state legislature and worked with them. And it was actually a bipartisan thing. They amended the building codes for Indigenous peoples building traditional structures, that we don't have to follow these certain building codes. And so that was actually a victory for us. We were pretty happy about that because we didn't really have a lot of money to go forward. But we were willing to do it, because we really believed what we're doing here. We're not using electricity in these structures, we're using all natural materials and it's something that's been used for thousands of years. So they wanted us to build modern building codes, but this isn't like a modern style house. So we were able to get that changed, and then we resumed work. We brought all kinds of people together. Some people put up TVs and stay there on site to help with the building. We get some local students here at the University of Minnesota. They came out as a group and helped build. And then when they come out, we help feed everyone. So this is a traditional activity for Dakota people called making dry corn. So you kind of like just boil the corn for like a minute or two, and then you take it out of the water and let it cool, and then you can like take all the kernels off, and then you can dry it, and it retains the sweetness, and then you can throw it in soup during the winter time and kind of bring it back to life, and it tastes really good. That's one of my favorite foods. And one of the things we did have recently is this that's my cousin. She gave birth to the baby. Do you remember the boy or girl? A girl, baby girl. And so as the first baby born out of the village. So we're really proud of that. And that's also my niece there. She's a midwife, so she helped with the labor using traditional Dakota birthing practices. And this is us kind of the other traditional activities. A group of us, I was going to get this time doing other things, but a group of people went to Lake Minneapolis, and there's wild rice growing there, and they harvested some rice this past summer. And this is another image of them working on the foundation, and kind of what it looks like from above. And so this is kind of, if you look to the west, out there on the horizon line, that's looking westward. There's like this kind of huge farm to our west, but there's a fence line there, and we planted all these trees. So hopefully, in like 5, 10, 15 years, we'll have like a nice tree blocking the view. And we planted a lot of fruit trees too. So kind of for some food. But speaking of food, we did acquire another land property, piece of property. This one is in the town of Mountain Lake, Minnesota. Has anybody been there? Mountain Lake, okay. All right, this is off 169, or no, it's not off 169. So you go south of 169, that's Mankato. And then you keep going, I can't remember what the highway it's on, but it's right off the highway. So it's like an hour and a half south of the Twin Cities. And there was this natural food farm called Jubilee. And they heard about the land backs movement. And so they wanted to donate their land to us. But we had to raise the money to buy the building. So we did that. And we have the building, and we have this food site now. And we're gonna grow all kinds of food there and use it to feed the different village sites there. So we're really happy about that. And as a greenhouse where we can grow food 10 out of 12 months a year. And so the part of our food sovereignty is we're doing traditional buffalo kill and harvesting all the different parts of the buffalo and using all the different parts to feed the people. And then sugar bush, doing the maple syrup collection and making maple syrup and sugar. harvesting the wild rice, which I showed you an image of, and having the food at the Mountain Lake site, which we're calling that Woju or Tue. So the site in Grand Falls that's called Zanio Tue. Zanio means health, so it's the healthy village. And then Woju Tue is the Mountain Lake site, which means the village of vibrant growth, because that's where we're going to grow food. So that's kind of everything in a nutshell about coaching keep trooping on stuff we're doing, and then the other stuff with the daycare and the dictionary. So I think we have time for questions. Okay. Questions? Maybe I said everything too well and you had questions.
How
Well, I think Mystic Lake, that's they call themselves Shark Bay, but they walk on so you know they do a lot of great stuff too. They have their what do they call it? They have their site where they collect all the food, turn it back into earth. What do we call that? Composting, yeah. They have their compost site and that does a lot of great stuff. They employ a lot of people and they do a lot of great cultural events. But you know, they're their own kind of tribal nation. So what they do, that's good. But what we're doing is, I guess, we're trying to do it for all the people who don't have a place here in Minnesota, or maybe they do have a place in Minnesota, but they want to live at this community site. So we're not, and I'm not saying Shakopee is going to get this stuff, but we're trying to be inclusive to as many different people as possible. And anybody is welcome to come to our village sites. Don't check your Shakopee person. Yeah.
If you have a question, please let me bring you the mic so that our remote audience can hear your question too. Thanks.
What do you feel the capacity of that site is in terms of population?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I think we have plans to build up to 7 earth lodges at the Zanio Tui sites, from my last recollection. Obviously, if we want it to be larger, we'll have to acquire more land to have more earth lodge sites, but you know, I think of maybe a family of like 40 people can live in one earth lodge. So, you know, obviously if there's 7, they do the math. So it'd probably be around 50 to 60, maybe 70 at the most, you know, but you don't want the village to get too large. Because if it does, you know, that makes a lot of problems arise, but you know, it's like when we're in Alabama meeting with the Muskogee, they said, you know, don't let these sites get too large, you know, because you can make a new site. You know? And that's kind of our goal is to have different village sites throughout Minnesota. We'd like to have one in northern Minnesota, you know, kind of with some wild rice. On a lake with wild rice, so we could harvest that. Maple sugar site, you know, there are a lot of maple trees. So there's a lot of different possibilities. You know, Minnesota has a great geography. So if we could get different places going, you know, then be a potential to have, you know, all these different village sites with, you know, maybe 50 people on each site. Yeah.
How few Dakota speakers were there when you started teaching Dakota? And what do you see the potential to, how many Dakota speakers do you hope to have, expect to have?
Yeah. Well, I'll start this way. When I started learning Dakota in 2000, they had this conference at the University of Minnesota, Dakota Language Conference in 2002. And at that time, they did kind of a census, and they said there was 38 Dakota speakers left in Minnesota. There's 4 Dakota communities I mentioned, but now we're down to 1. So, but there's other Dakota speakers in different places. they mentioned it would be a little bit body places, so. But, you know, eventually you have to teach more people, especially starting with a 3 to 5-year-old, or maybe even younger, starting at 9 months. Ideally, the parents would be speaking at home. So you can learn from whom forward, but that's where you gotta have the young adults who really want to learn, you know, and get proficient enough. You know, and then hopefully they get married and have some children and raise those kids to be the speakers. So that's kind of a pathway.
I think we have time for one last question.
Have you identified some properties that you would like to have in the future? Properties in Minnesota you'd like to purchase?
No, we haven't right now. Well, you know, these 2 sites kind of came upon us suddenly. This piece of land by Granite Falls that kind of opened up, and we said, well, we'd like to acquire this land, we got to raise the money for it. We already had most of the money raised, and then we kind of worked with this guy, his name is John Staves, and he really helped us with the fundraising. He's not Dakota, he's of Euro ancestry, and so it was really helpful. And this Mountain Lake site also came available from these people. It was Steve and Judy Harder were the ones who wanted it. They heard about our organization, they want to get that way they raise all the money for it. That's kind of how it's happened so far. But you know, if anybody knows of land that we could buy, we're always willing to listen. But you know, we get so busy that sometimes like we don't have time to go out searching for land. So but like I said, we'd like to get some land with some maple trees. We'd like to get some land with wild rice available or close to wild rice so we can harvest it. So those are some of the future plans. All right, thank you, everyone.
Ashoka, thank you so much.
Just a quick reminder, next Sunday, we have our week in climate policy. Michael Miller, Executive Director of Energy,
Will be talking to us about his career or life in climate policy, emphasis on how progress of the states remains steady, even though the power of money in politics thwarted meaningful federal action for 32 years, both under both Republican and Democratic presidents. He'll describe the incredible game-changing momentum currently as evidenced by the Inflation Reduction Act